Prepare to be captivated by Shadows in the Storm, a spine-tingling horror story set in the quiet town of Ridgewood. When dark, ominous storm clouds bring forth winged creatures, the townspeople must confront their deepest fears to survive. Join Sheriff Miller, Dr. Emerson, and the brave townsfolk as they uncover the terrifying truth behind these supernatural beings. With a shocking twist that will leave you breathless, this story is a must-watch for all horror enthusiasts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more thrilling content.
The town of Ridgewood had always been quiet. Nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, it was a place where everyone knew each other and nothing much ever happened. But everything changed when the storm clouds appeared. It began as a regular summer afternoon. The air was warm, the sky was clear, and children played in the park while their parents chatted on benches. But by mid-afternoon, the first hints of a storm began to show. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, moving with an unusual speed towards the town. "Looks like a storm's coming in," remarked old Mr. Henderson to his neighbor, Mrs. Abbott, as they stood in their adjacent gardens. But this storm was unlike any they had seen before. The clouds were darker, almost black, and swirled in patterns that seemed unnatural. As they loomed closer, an eerie silence fell over Ridgewood. Birds stopped singing, and the usual hum of the town's activity died down. By evening, the storm was directly overhead. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and occasional flashes of lightning lit up the ominous clouds. It was during one such flash that young Tommy Sanders first saw them. "Mom, Dad, look!" he shouted from his bedroom window. His parents rushed in, their faces pale from the sudden change in weather. Tommy pointed towards the sky where shadows seemed to move within the clouds. At first, his parents dismissed it as a trick of the light, but then they saw two dark, winged shapes flitting about within the storm. The power went out shortly after sunset, plunging the town into darkness. The only light came from the frequent lightning strikes, each illuminating the winged creatures above. People huddled in their homes, peering out of windows, terrified and fascinated by what they saw. Jake Miller, the town sheriff, decided to investigate. Grabbing his flashlight and revolver, he ventured outside, determined to find out what was happening. He wasn't the only one. A few brave souls joined in, including Dr. Laura Emerson, the town's only physician, and Robert Johnson, a local journalist. As they walked through the deserted streets, they could hear the flapping of wings above, a sound that grew louder with each step. When they reached the town square, a particularly bright flash of lightning revealed the creatures in full. They were unlike anything they had ever seen, humanoid in shape, but with large, bat-like wings. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and their skin seemed to shimmer in the storm's glow. One of them swooped down, letting out a screech that sent chills down their spines. "What are they?" Robert whispered, his voice trembling. Dr. Emerson shook her head, unable to answer. But Sheriff Miller, always the practical man, aimed his flashlight at the creature and fired his revolver. The bullet struck, and the creature let out a horrific scream before retreating into the clouds. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the town was left in a state of shock. The power was still out, and communication with the outside world was cut off. More troubling, a few people were missing, including Tommy Sanders. Sheriff Miller organized a search party, but despite their efforts, there was no trace of the missing. The only clue was a set of claw marks on Tommy's windowsill, suggesting that whatever took him did so from his room. As the day wore on, the storm clouds began to gather again. The townspeople, now thoroughly frightened, gathered in the town hall to discuss their options. "We need to leave," said Mrs. Abbott, her voice shaking. "Those creatures, whatever they are, they're coming back. We can't just abandon our homes," argued Mr. Henderson. "We need to find out what they want and how to stop them." It was then that Dr. Emerson spoke up. "I've been doing some research," she said, holding up an old, dusty book. There are legends about creatures like these, winged demons that come with the storm. They feed on fear and chaos. The room fell silent as she continued. There's a way to stop them, but it's risky. We need to confront them directly, find their leader, and banish it. Only then will the others leave. As the storm clouds grew darker and the creatures' screeches echoed through the town, the townspeople prepared for their confrontation. Sheriff Miller armed himself, and the bravest of the townsfolk, while Dr. Emerson prepared a ritual she found in the old book. When the storm was at its peak, they made their way to the town square. The winged creatures were waiting, circling above like vultures. With a nod from Sheriff Miller, the group spread out, ready to face whatever came. A loud screech filled the air, and the leader of the creatures descended. It was larger and more terrifying than the others, with eyes that seemed to pierce through the soul. Dr. Emerson stepped forward, chanting the incantation from her book. The creature hissed and lunged at her, but Sheriff Miller and the others opened fire, driving it back. Dr. Emerson continued her chant, her voice growing louder despite the chaos around her. The leader screeched in fury, its form flickering like a shadow in the wind. With a final shot, Dr. Emerson completed the ritual. A blinding light engulfed the creature, and it let out a deafening scream before disintegrating into the storm. The other creatures shrieked in unison, their forms dissolving into mist as they fled into the night. When the storm finally passed, the town of Ridgewood was left in an uneasy calm. The missing people were never found, and the townsfolk were left with scars, both physical and emotional. But they had survived. Sheriff Miller and Dr. Emerson were hailed as heroes, but they knew the truth. The creatures were not gone for good, merely banished. The book warned that they could return if the conditions were right. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal. The storm clouds never gathered in the same way again, and the winged creatures became a legend, a story told to scare children. But every now and then, on particularly stormy nights, a shadow would flicker within the clouds, and those who remembered would shudder, praying that the creatures would never return. Years later, as the town of Ridgewood continued to heal, a new family moved into the old Sanders house. They had a young son, about Tommy's age when he disappeared. One evening, during a gentle summer storm, the boy, named Alex, stood at his window watching the clouds. "Mom, Dad, look," he shouted. His parents rushed in, expecting to see something ordinary. But as they peered out the window, their faces went pale, for there, within the storm clouds, were the winged creatures, watching, waiting. As the parents pulled Alex away from the window, a realization dawned on them. The creatures were not just attracted by fear and chaos. They were searching for something or someone. The storm was not merely a natural phenomenon, but a harbinger of their return, and in the old Sanders house, a faint whisper echoed, almost as if from another world. "They're back."